Welcome back to 1834, chess friends. The score is perfectly balanced at one match each, and in this third match, they've won 2 games each. Now, it's the first to win 6 games that will take this third match, and Mr. Jack Hackett has made it into his armchair on time today, so that's good. McDonnell has the white pieces, and he begins with e4. Now, Labourdonnais lost the Sicilian the last time he played it, and he continues to avoid it now. He goes for e5, and straight away McDonnell goes for the King's Gambit, as we might expect. And straight away there's tension in the room. Gentlemen must always accept a gambit, as we all know, except that Labourdonnais threw out that rule the last time McDonnell offered him one. So what will he do this time? He accepts the gambit. Yes, good job too. We continue with knight f3 and now g5. Now, we've seen these moves before in game number 1, which ended up going for a marathon 99 moves before McDonnell finally won it. And we continue here with bishop to c4 and pushing the pawn. Still the same as in game number 1, attacking the knight here. And again, McDonnell decides to gambit away a whole knight by ignoring this pawn's attack. He plays knight to c3. Indeed, this opening is named the McDonnell Gambit variation of the King's Gambit these days, so awesome. And after covering game 1, I went and told all my real-life chess friends about this super cool opening and how I hoped McDonnell would try it again, and here he is, doing it again. Of course, Labourdonnais, the gentleman, accepts the gambited knight, and we have queen captures the pawn back. Now, in game number 1, Labourdonnais played queen to f6 here, leading to an attack from McDonnell on the queen. But Labourdonnais goes for something different this time. He plays knight to c6 instead. Now here, Mr. Hackett says that sacrificing the bishop with check would be very drawing. After the king captures, the queen checks, the king comes across, the queen checks again, and we have some repeats until it's a draw. But that didn't actually happen, but it was very interesting. Thank you, Mr. Hackett. Instead, we have d4 from McDonnell. And this is just losing because Labourdonnais should just check with the queen here, block with the pawn, and then after the knight captures on d4, queen retreats, and the black queen retreats, and then the bishop captures the pawn. Now, at this point, Labourdonnais is just a whole knight up and completely fine. However, again, this did not happen. We had instead, we had d4, and then we have knight captures d4 straight away. So what does McDonnell do here? Does he move his queen to safety? No, he decides to go for the bishop sacrifice on f7, because why not? Very brave McDonnell, I like this, but I'm a little bit unsure how it's going to work out. Of course, Labourdonnais is happy to accept all the gambits and all the sacrificed pieces. And here, McDonnell doesn't capture the pawn with check. Maybe he's thinking the horse is going to block or the queen's going to block, and it's just going to be pointless. Instead, he goes for queen to h5 with check. And now we have king to g7. And this looks very similar to the drawing position that Mr. Hackett told us about earlier, except that McDonnell doesn't continue with the checks. Instead, he breaks the repeats by castling. And now McDonnell has given up so much material that this position is just completely won for Labourdonnais. Labourdonnais just needs to play defense for a few moves and slowly develop his pieces. For example, knight to f6, attacking the queen. The queen moves aside with check, so the king moves aside, pushing the pawn now, and this other knight comes back to help the defense, attacking the queen, so the queen moves aside, and Labourdonnais has enough time to push d6 to free up some space. He doesn't mind giving up the knight here after the queen captures the pawn back. McDonnell's not going to want to exchange queens here because he's down material. He should retreat to d3. And after all of that, Labourdonnais is winning by a whole piece and will be expected to win the game. In fact, McDonnell is starting to sweat a little bit. However, knight f6 was not played. Knight to e6 was played first, and Mr. Hackett says the tables are now turned and McDonnell is winning despite being 2 whole pieces down at this point. If you look under his comb over, you can see Labourdonnais starting to sweat too. It's anybody's game. Will McDonnell be able to maintain his current attack? Let's see. We have bishop captures on f4, but Labourdonnais ignores it for now. He wants to develop some pieces. He gets his bishop out with tempo because it comes with check, so the king moves into the corner. And again, he moves his knight with an attack on the queen. Here, McDonnell needs to check with the bishop in order to keep up the pressure on the black king. For example, after the king retreats, then the queen's still under attack, so it's going to move to h4. Now, this knight's going to need to come back in order to block the check here, like so. And now the knight's going to come in to d5 to help with the attack, so the bishop's going to need to retreat to help with the defense. Now we have a pawn push, and Bourdonnais can push his pawn, try to get his light square bishop out. But we're going to capture with the knight here with check, and it's looking extremely grim for Bourdonnais. This knight's pinned, and if you capture here, the pawn is coming here, the queen can't capture back, the rook's helping with the attack, and it's looking super bad. However, McDonnell, instead of playing the check with the bishop, he blows it and instead checks with the queen, and Bourdonnais is back in the game. The king retreats to g8 and McDonnell goes for a rook lift, obviously planning to come across to here to deliver more checks. Bourdonnais brings his bishop back to try to chase away the queen, but McDonnell checks first before moving his queen. The king comes to f7 and the queen retreats. However, this gives Bourdonnais time to pick up the bishop here, and the queen captures back. And now we have d6 finally from Bourdonnais, freeing up his light squared bishop. Rook to f1, trying to get some more power in towards the king here. Yeah, it's looking pretty strong, but I think Bourdonnais has enough defense here. We have bishop to e6, finally getting development here. However, Mr. Hackett says that maybe a better move was rook to g8, because this bishop to e6 move will end up losing this knight. Queen to g5, and now Bourdonnais can't defend by bringing the rook across anymore because it's just going to get captured. This knight can't capture the queen because it's pinned. The king can't capture the queen because of the rook. So that's no good. You can't defend with the rook. And you can't defend with this bishop either. If it goes here, that's just going to get captured. After the king moves, the knight's going to get captured too, and probably this rook or the bishop here is going to fall as well. If it comes to this square to help defend the knight, then we have the queen coming in anyway, and then we're just going to lose the rook. And so everything's bad in that respect. This knight is just lost, as we said. So instead, Bourdonnais decides to give up his knight straight away. He moves his king first. So the rook captures the knight, and the queen comes to e7. Bourdonnais is still up material, but the McDonnell pieces are more active. It's still anybody's game. Both McDonnell's rooks have left the back rank, so he will need to be careful about any back rank mates. So yeah, I've often wondered what goes on in Mr. Hackett's mind when he evaluates positions like this. McDonnell doubles up his rooks, Bourdonnais pushes a pawn, and the knight comes back to e2. And now Bourdonnais plays his rook to g8 and attacks the queen. It's okay to do this now. The queen is undefended, and this bishop's defending the rook. So the queen comes across to deliver a check, and the king goes to d8. We have the knight coming up to d4 now, and the bishop goes to g4 and attacks both the queen and the rook at the same time. However, McDonnell is okay because he has a check in store here, and Bourdonnais brings his king across to c8 out of the way. We have rook back to f1, saving the rook, and now the back rank is looking a little bit safer now. The bishop comes all the way back to d7 to help defend, and the doubled rook attacks the queen, so the queen retreats. Now McDonnell really needs to get an attack going on the king again, so he decides to start pushing some pawns. Bourdonnais defends with b6, and this allows a check from the queen. So the king comes forward, the queen comes back to c4, and Bourdonnais gets his dark square bishop off the back rank to e7. Now, Mr. Hackett told me earlier, when he was sober, that a nice move for McDonnell would be to push his b-pawn. And I'll give you a couple of reasons why. If, in return, he pushes the c-pawn, the knight just moves over to f5, and there's going to be too much for Bourdonnais to defend. He's probably going to be losing one of the bishops here. If instead, for example, the rook comes across to c8, then you're just going to capture the pawn, and there's all sorts of nastiness going on. If the king retreats, you're going to lose the bishop, and there's knight coming in, the queen's coming in, this pawn's looking very dangerous, coming to either of these squares, and all sorts of nasty business. However, McDonnell didn't go for that. Instead, he decided to give up a full knight for some reason. So thank you, Mr. Hackett, for the good variations. Thank you, McDonnell, for the crazy sacrifices. And we continue. Instead of capturing the knight straight away, however, Bourdonnais pushes his pawn and threatens the queen. The queen captures the pawn, and now we have the bishop capturing the knight, of course. Queen to a5 with check here, and so the king retreats. And McDonnell is sadly starting to run out of steam a bit here. He just brings his queen across to f5, and Labourdonnais backs off his dark square bishop, revealing a double attack on this pawn. So McDonnell defends with rook to e1, and now queen to e5 from Labourdonnais, offering a queen exchange. And of course, McDonnell does not want to accept this. He's far too many pieces down. Labourdonnais got double bishops. It's just ridiculous. So the queen comes back to f3, and now we have d5 from Labourdonnais, trying to make some business happen in the center. McDonnell plays b5, seemingly giving up the pawn. However, Labourdonnais doesn't want to accept it because he'll probably just end up in a pin. So instead, he retreats the bishop, and McDonnell decides to exchange his rook for that light squared bishop. And the king captures back. Interesting, McDonnell. And here he goes for a check on f7 with the queen, but the bishop just blocks it on c7. And now there's a checkmate threat from Labourdonnais' aligned bishop and queen, looking very nasty. And it seems inevitable that McDonnell is going to have to accept a queen exchange in order to fight this off. For example, capturing here, and this comes with check, so the queen exchange is forced. But in that case, Labourdonnais is going to be a whole rook and bishop up and just 100% winning. So that's no good for McDonnell. Alternatively, he can try blocking with the pawn here. But in that case, this black pawn is just going to be coming down the center of the board and just wrecking everything. So, for example, the rook coming across here, doubling up, you might try to push c4 to do something about the pawn, but it's just going to capture. The queen's going to come back to defend, and you're just going to keep pushing the pawn, and it's going to be bishop and two rooks and a queen and a pawn against a queen and a rook. Just 100% loss for McDonnell. So, back here, in this position, McDonnell realized the situation and decided to resign the game. So very sad for him. I'm smiling, but yes, it's very sad. Well done, McDonnell, for coming up with such crazy attacks nonetheless. And well done, Labourdonnais, for coming out on top. And I will see you again next time.